The following story is a work of fiction and contains disturbing themes. Reader discretion is advised. The house was a lie. A beautiful, meticulously crafted lie that Leonard had built with his own two hands and every last cent of his inheritance. It stood on a bluff overlooking a serene, glass-like lake, its redwood frame weathered to a dignified silver gray. The windows, vast sheets of polished glass, reflected the sky in a way that made the house seem to hover between earth and heaven. Inside, the floors were a dark, lustrous cherry wood, and the furniture was an homage to mid-century minimalism. Clean lines, soft leather, and an abundance of negative space. It was the kind of house that appeared in glossy magazines, a testament to good taste and a life of quiet, contemplative success. But the house was a lie. The stillness of the lake was a lie, a thin veneer over a murky, forgotten depth. The tasteful furniture was a lie, a carefully chosen set of props for a play with no audience. And Leonard, with his calm demeanor and his meticulously trimmed beard, was the biggest lie of all. He had moved into the house a year ago, fleeing a life that had become too loud, too crowded with the demands of others. The city, with its constant hum and relentless expectations, had felt like a cage. He had sold his business, cut ties with his few remaining friends, and retreated to this sanctuary. He told himself he was seeking solitude, a chance to reconnect with the simple rhythms of life. He would read, he would write, he would walk by the lake. It was a noble, if slightly cliché, aspiration. The first few months were exactly as he had planned. He fell into a routine of tranquil monotony. He woke with the sun, made a pot of coffee, and sat by the enormous window, watching the mist rise from the lake. He spent his afternoons reading, the silence of the house broken only by the turning of a page. He cooked simple meals, finding a quiet satisfaction in the act of creation. He was a man adrift, but in a good way, a way that felt like freedom. The lie began to unravel on a Tuesday, 3 months after he moved in. He was in the pantry, reaching for a can of soup, when he noticed it. A small, almost invisible scuff mark on the cherry wood floor, just beneath the bottom shelf. It was no bigger than a thumbnail, a faint, pale line against the rich darkness. He stared at it, a flicker of irritation passing through him. He prided himself on the pristine condition of his home. He knelt, his fingers tracing the mark. It wasn't a scratch. It was a gouge, as if something sharp and hard had been dragged across the wood. He grabbed a rag and some furniture polish, convinced he could buff it out. But the mark remained, a stubborn, defiant little scar. He straightened up, his brow furrowed. It was an imperfection in his perfect world, and it bothered him more than it should have. He made a mental note to call a specialist, someone who could patch the wood seamlessly. The next day, he found another one. This time, it was a few feet away, near the entrance to the living room. Another scuff, a mirror image of the first. He knelt again, his heart a little faster this time. He was meticulous, almost pathologically so. He had never made these marks. He lived alone. The house was locked up tight. How could they be there? Over the next week, more appeared. Tiny, faint, almost imperceptible lines. On the kitchen floor, near the sink. In the hallway by the guest bedroom door. They weren't random. They seemed to be moving, migrating from one part of the house to another. A slow, silent procession of imperfections. He started tracking them, marking their locations on a floor plan he drew on a legal pad. The pattern was erratic, illogical. They would appear, then vanish, only to reappear a few feet away. He started sleeping with the lights on. The stillness of the house, which he had once found so soothing, now felt oppressive, heavy with unspoken secrets. He found himself listening, straining to hear something, anything, in the silence. The creak of a floorboard, the sigh of the wind through the eaves, the hum of the refrigerator. Each sound was amplified, distorted, a potential harbinger of something unseen. One night he was woken by a sound, a quiet, rhythmic tapping. He sat up in bed, his heart hammering against his ribs. He held his breath, listening. Tap, tap. It was coming from the floor beneath his bed. He slowly reached for the flashlight he now kept on his bedside table. He slid out of bed, his feet cold against the polished wood. The tapping stopped. He got down on his hands and knees, shining the flashlight under the bed. Dust bunnies, a forgotten sock, the sleek, black frame of the bed itself. Nothing more. He got back in bed, his muscles coiled with tension. He lay awake for hours, his mind racing, trying to find a logical explanation. A faulty pipe? a loose wire, but the tapping had been too deliberate, too intentional. The next morning, he found it. A new mark, a fresh, raw gouge in the floor, directly beneath where his head had been on the pillow. It was longer than the others, deeper. A thin sliver of wood had been torn away, leaving a jagged, pale wound. He felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The marks weren't random. They were being made by something that was moving around his house in the dark. Something that knew where he slept. He began to search the house, meticulously, obsessively. He checked every closet, every cabinet, every crawl space. He went up into the attic, a cramped, dusty space he had never entered before. He went down into the basement, a dark, cavernous space with a dirt floor. He found nothing. The house was empty, just him and the silent, spreading wounds on the floor. He installed security cameras, 3 of them positioned in the main living areas. He wired them to a monitor in his bedroom. He watched the grainy, black and white feed all night, his eyes stinging from the strain. The house was still. The cameras showed nothing but empty rooms, the silent dance of dust motes in the dim light. And yet, when he woke up in the morning, a new mark would be there. A fresh scar on the floor, a testament to the presence of something he couldn't see. He started locking his bedroom door. He shoved a chair beneath the doorknob. He was a grown man, a successful businessman, reduced to sleeping like a terrified child. The fear was a living thing, a cold, writhing serpent in his gut. It was no longer a vague unease. It was a certainty. He was not alone. The marks began to change. They were no longer just scuffs and gouges. They were forming patterns, clusters of parallel lines, triangles, circles. They were evolving, becoming a language he couldn't understand. He spent hours on his knees, tracing the patterns with his finger, a frantic cryptographer trying to decipher a message from a ghost. What was it trying to tell him? Was it a warning? A threat? One morning, he woke up to a new sound, a low, rhythmic scratching. It was coming from inside the walls. He pressed his ear against the plaster, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was a slow, deliberate sound, like fingernails against a blackboard. He ripped the plaster away with a crowbar, his hands shaking. The space inside was empty. Just a few wires, some insulation, the bare wooden studs. Nothing. But when he put his ear to the wood, he could still hear it. The sound was everywhere. He stopped eating. The thought of food made him feel sick. The silence of the house had been replaced by a cacophony of unseen noises. The scratching in the walls, the tapping in the floor, the whisper of something dragging itself along the ceiling. He was a prisoner in his own home, a man tormented by a phantom. He called the police. They listened patiently to his frantic, disjointed story. They sent a patrol car. 2 young officers walked through the house, their faces a mixture of professional politeness and barely suppressed condescension. They saw no one. They heard nothing. They suggested he get some rest, maybe see a doctor. They left him with a pamphlet on local mental health services. The officer's visit seemed to enrage whatever was in the house with him. The marks on the floor multiplied. They covered the kitchen, the living room, the hallway. They were no longer just patterns. They were words, scrawled in the polished wood, etched with a horrifying precision. You don't belong here. He is gone. You are not alone. The last one was the worst. It was scrawled on the floor of his bedroom, right at the foot of his bed. A long, deep line that ran the length of the room. It was not a word. It was a stick figure. A crude, childlike drawing of a man with his arms and legs spread wide, as if in a state of perpetual crucifixion. A long, thin line ran from the figure's chest down to his groin. He screamed. A raw, guttural sound that tore through the silent house. He grabbed a sledgehammer from the garage and began to smash the floor. He brought the hammer down again and again, splintering the cherry wood, shattering the beautiful lie he had built. He smashed the walls. He broke the windows. He tore down the curtains. He threw the furniture into the lake. He was a madman, destroying his own sanctuary, his own prison. He collapsed in the middle of the wreckage, exhausted, his hands raw and bleeding. The house was no longer a lie. It was a ruin, a testament to his madness. He lay there for a long time, the cold wind blowing through the shattered windows, the silent, judging stare of the lake on him. He was a madman. The police had been right. He was alone in the house. He was the one making the marks, a subconscious act of self-sabotage, a physical manifestation of his unraveling mind. The tapping, the scratching, the whispers, they were all in his head. There was no ghost, no phantom, no unseen tormentor, only him. The realization brought a quiet, terrifying calm. He stood up, his body aching. He looked at the wreckage around him, the ruined floors, the shattered walls. He had done this to himself. He had built a perfect prison, and then he had torn it apart with his own hands. He walked into the master bathroom. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. A gaunt, hollow-eyed man stared back at him. He was a stranger, a ghost in his own home. He reached for the medicine cabinet. He opened it, his hands steady. He looked at the bottle of sleeping pills, a full bottle. He thought about the lake, so still, so deep. He looked at the reflection in the mirror again. And that's when he saw it. In the bathroom mirror, behind his own reflection, was a second face. It was the face of a man, old and gaunt, with wild white hair. His eyes were wide with terror, his mouth a silent scream. And in the reflection, Leonard could see the man was holding a camera. He was taking a picture of Leonard. Right now. Leonard spun around. The bathroom was empty. He was alone. He looked back at the mirror. The face was gone. His own reflection stared back at him, but it was different. His face was no longer gaunt. His eyes were no longer hollow. His mouth was no longer a grim, straight line. He was smiling, a wide, manic, horrifying smile. And then his reflection blinked. Not Leonard, his reflection. It blinked, slowly, deliberately, and then it winked at him. Leonard felt the final piece of his sanity shatter. He staggered back, his hands pressed against the cool, tiled wall. He looked at the reflection again, and this time he saw something else. In the background of his own reflection, in the corner of the room, he saw a small, dark shadow, a stain, a dark, sticky stain on the pristine white tile. He looked down at his feet. There was nothing there. He looked back at the mirror. The stain was gone. His reflection was still smiling, winking. And then it raised its hand and pointed. It pointed to the medicine cabinet, to the bottle of sleeping pills. He backed away, his heart a wild, frantic drum against his ribs. He was not mad. He was not alone. The house was not a prison. It was a trap, and he was the mouse. He ran from the bathroom, his feet pounding on the ruined floor. He ran through the shattered living room, past the gaping hole in the wall. He ran to the front door, his hand fumbling with the lock. He burst out into the cool night air, gasping, his lungs burning. He ran down the long driveway towards the road. He could hear the sound of his own footsteps, a frantic rhythm against the quiet of the night. And then he heard another sound, a slow, rhythmic scratching. It was coming from inside his own head. He stumbled, falling to his knees on the gravel. He pressed his hands against his ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was useless. It was inside him. He looked back at the house, a dark, silent silhouette against the moonlit sky. The windows, the vast sheets of polished glass, were black, but he could see something in them. A faint, pale light, a single small light, moving from room to room, as if someone, a person, was walking through the house carrying a flashlight. He started to laugh. A low, hollow sound that was not his own. The scratching in his head grew louder, a frantic, frantic scratching. And in the ruined, silent house, a single small light continued its slow, deliberate tour. He was not mad. The house was not haunted. It was occupied, and the occupant had just taken control.